Some stories are so devastating, so unimaginable, that they shake you to your very core. What you're about to witness is not just a testimony, it's a daughter's ultimate sacrifice, and a truth so horrifying that many refuse to believe it could happen in our world today. Fatima al-Rashid was an ordinary Saudi Arabian woman, a devoted wife and mother until the day everything changed. Her daughter Layla made a choice to follow Christ. What happened next is beyond comprehension. Layla was tortured to death with boiling oil by her own father, a punishment so brutal, so inhumane, that it defies all understanding. As you watch this, please lift Fatima in prayer. What she has endured, what she has lost, and what she now faces for the sake of Christ will leave you in tears. This is a story the world needs to hear, a story of a mother's love, a daughter's faith, and the price many pay in silence. Watch to the very end. You will never forget Fatima and Layla's story. I never imagined that sending my daughter away for education would lead to her death in our own home. I'm 43 years old and my name is Fatima al-Rashid. What I'm about to share will break your heart, but it might also save your soul. My daughter died because she chose Jesus over Islam, and in losing her, I found the truth that she died protecting. Before I tell you what happened in the darkness of our basement, in the horror of that final night, I need you to connect with me. Please comment below and tell me where you're watching or reading this from. Are you in Dubai, Doha, Detroit, or somewhere else? We need to pray for each other, to stand together as a family across every border. Your comment helps build a community of believers who understand persecution, who know the cost of following Christ. Drop your location below. Let's unite in prayer and support. Now let me take you back to where my story begins. In a world of rules and silence, I was born in 1981 in Al-Qasim, one of the most conservative regions in central Saudi Arabia. From the moment I could understand words, I was taught three things above all else: honor Allah, obey your father, and never question tradition. My childhood was defined by silence. Girls didn't speak unless spoken to. We didn't express opinions. We didn't make choices. Every decision about our lives was made by men, our fathers, our brothers, eventually our husbands. We existed to serve, to obey, to disappear into the background of a world that valued us only for what we could provide. When I turned 17 in 1998, my father arranged my marriage to Sheikh Abdullah Al-Harith, a senior official in the Ministry of Islamic Affairs. I had never seen his face before our wedding night. I had no say in the matter. My father told me it was an honor that such a respected man wanted me as his wife, and I believed him because I'd been taught never to question. Sheikh Abdullah was 42 when we married, 25 years older than me. On our wedding night, I was terrified. He was a stranger and suddenly he owned every aspect of my life. But I told myself, this was normal, this was right, this was what Allah wanted for women. I told myself I would learn to love him through submission, through patience, through silence. Our life together was built around his position and reputation. We lived in a massive villa in Riyadh's Al-Nakhil district, a home with tall iron gates, thick marble floors, and rooms that always smelled of oud incense and cardamom coffee. It was beautiful but cold, more like a museum than a home. Every detail of my life was controlled. I wore full abaya and niqab at all times, even inside our house if male relatives were visiting. I rarely spoke in public settings. My duties were clear: keep the home in perfect order, prepare elaborate hospitality for the imams and religious officials who visited regularly, and eventually bear children who would be raised in complete obedience to Islamic law. I wasn't allowed to have friends outside our family circle. I couldn't pursue hobbies or interests. My days were filled with preparing tea trays for endless guests, memorizing Quranic verses, and performing wudu before the 5 daily prayers. Every movement, every word, every thought had to align with what was expected of a sheikh's wife. Sheikh Abdullah was respected, almost feared, in religious circles, especially among clerics from the Grand Mosque in Mecca. At home, he was distant, firm, always invoking Allah's name to remind me of my duties. He rarely showed affection. Our relationship was transactional. I fulfilled my role, and he provided for me materially. 2 years into our marriage in 2000, I gave birth to a baby girl. We named her Layla. The moment they placed her in my arms, something awakened inside me that I'd never felt before. It wasn't duty or obligation or religious devotion. It was love. Pure, overwhelming, unconditional love. For the first time in my life, I felt something real, something beyond the rules and rituals that had defined my existence. I would hold Layla close when no one was watching and whisper dreams I had for her. Dreams I'd never dared dream for myself. I wanted her to smile freely, to ask questions, to see the world beyond our villa's iron gates. As Layla grew, she became everything I wasn't allowed to be. She was curious, asking questions that made the imams uncomfortable. She laughed loudly when propriety demanded silence. She was intelligent, absorbing knowledge faster than her tutors could provide it. She was strong-willed in ways that both worried and amazed me. Even Sheikh Abdullah, who was always strict and controlling with me, softened around Layla. He called her his little moon and made plans for her to study at the best institutions when she came of age. I could see she was special, different, meant for something beyond the limited life I'd lived. When Layla turned 16 in 2016, discussions about her future intensified. Abdullah wanted her to study Islamic law at King Saud University in Riyadh, following a path that would keep her close, keep her controlled, keep her within the boundaries we all lived by. But Layla had different dreams. She was fascinated by literature, philosophy, languages, ideas that extended beyond the narrow world of Islamic studies. She wanted to explore, to learn, to think freely. I secretly supported her desires, though I could never say so aloud. For months she negotiated with her father, using logic and patience, slowly convincing him that a Western education would actually enhance our family's reputation rather than diminish it. Finally, Abdullah agreed to send her abroad, not a common decision in our conservative community, but his position and influence allowed for exceptions. It was decided that Layla would attend Columbia University in New York City to study Middle Eastern Studies and International Relations. The official story we told relatives was that she was pursuing advanced Islamic studies abroad. We let people believe what they wanted to believe, but I knew the truth. Layla was finally getting the freedom to discover who she really was. I helped her pack with trembling hands. Long-sleeved clothing, scarves, her Quran, her prayer rug, all the things that would keep her connected to home. I kissed her forehead at the airport and told her to remember Allah always. But inside, I whispered a different prayer, one I didn't even fully understand at the time. I prayed she would find joy, purpose, and truth, even if it wasn't what we'd been taught our entire lives. Layla arrived in New York City in the fall of 2016. She was only 18, but already more confident than I had ever been. I watched her board the plane at King Khalid International Airport, wearing her black abaya, but I could see the excitement in her eyes, a young woman eager to explore a world I would never see. At Columbia, everything was different for her. No call to prayer echoing 5 times daily. No mosques on every corner. No one monitoring her every movement or judging her every choice. I thought the culture shock would overwhelm her, but instead, it gave her space to breathe, to think, to grow. She sent me long emails about her classes in comparative religion and international literature. She described the cold New York winters, the coffee shops where students gathered, the freedom of walking down the street without a male guardian. I was happy she was safe, but I began noticing changes in her tone. She wrote less about Allah and more about concepts like peace, love, and truth. At first, I dismissed it as youthful enthusiasm, the natural excitement of experiencing new ideas. But as months passed, the shift became more pronounced. By her second year, Layla mentioned joining a group of friends who met regularly for discussions and study. She told me about a girl named Emily from Texas, a practicing Christian who invited her to group dinners and cultural exchange events. These gatherings were hosted by Christian students, but Layla assured me it was only for dialogue and learning. Still, unease crept into my heart. When I asked her if she still prayed 5 times daily, she gave vague answers. She would say she prayed, but that she also spent a lot of time thinking. I didn't understand what thinking had to do with prayer. In Islam, you don't think. You obey, you recite, you follow. Then one day, she casually mentioned she'd visited a church in Manhattan out of curiosity. My heart dropped. I asked which church, trying to keep my voice calm. She said it was called Redeemer Presbyterian, and she described it as beautiful, not like what we'd been told churches were. I warned her to be careful, but she laughed it off, saying she just liked the music. I wanted to believe her. But something in her tone told me this was more than casual curiosity. What I didn't know, what she kept hidden from me and from her Muslim friends, was that Layla had started attending weekly Bible study groups. She would sit quietly, listen to sermons, and read from something called the New Testament. She became fascinated by Jesus, not the Isa we'd been taught about in Islam, a prophet with no divinity, no cross, no sacrifice, but someone completely different. Someone who loved deeply, forgave freely, and offered grace instead of judgment. She had questions. Why did his words feel alive? Why did his message feel different from everything she'd heard in the mosques? How could love be more important than rules? Slowly her heart was being transformed. She still wore her hijab when she went outside, still looked like the modest Muslim girl she'd always been. But inside, something fundamental was shifting. One night, she called me crying. At first, I panicked, thinking something terrible had happened. But through her tears, she told me about a dream she'd had. She described seeing a man in glowing white robes standing in a garden filled with light. He didn't speak, but his eyes were full of kindness she'd never seen before. He reached out his hand to her, and she felt peace like she'd never experienced. She woke up with tears on her face and a name echoing in her mind. Yeshua, a name she'd never heard before that dream. I didn't know what to say. I suggested maybe it was Shaitan trying to confuse her, trying to lead her astray. But she insisted no, this felt different. This felt true. Over the following weeks, she had the same dream repeatedly. Always the same man, always the same overwhelming sense of safety and love. Always that name, Yeshua. I began to fear that something spiritual was pulling her away from Islam, but I didn't know how to stop it, or if I even should. During her final year at Columbia, Layla made a decision she wouldn't tell us about until much later. She fully gave her heart to Jesus Christ. In the privacy of her small student apartment near Morningside Heights, she knelt on the floor, not facing Mecca, but simply looking out her window at the New York skyline. She prayed, not in Arabic but in English, speaking from her heart rather than reciting memorized verses. She told Jesus she believed in him, that she didn't understand everything but knew he was real, that she wanted him to take her life and make it his. I learned all of this later from her journal, after everything had happened. At the time, all I noticed was that Layla seemed calmer, lighter, more joyful than before. She spoke about forgiveness, about loving enemies, about a God who knows you personally rather than judging you from a distance. I didn't realize she had already crossed over. To me, she was just exploring new ideas. But to Layla, she had already left Islam and walked into a faith that filled every corner of her soul. She continued her studies and graduated, with honors in 2020, when Abdullah and I flew to New York for her graduation ceremony. She hugged us tightly, but I noticed something hidden beneath her scarf, a small cross necklace. I asked her about it quietly. She smiled and said it was just jewelry. But I knew better. Something was different. Something had fundamentally changed in my daughter. That summer she returned to Riyadh. I welcomed her home with joy and pride, believing she'd gone abroad, learned well, and was ready to contribute to our society with her new knowledge and education. But Layla had returned with more than a degree. She had come home with a message, one that would soon tear our entire world apart. I didn't know it yet, but the daughter I had raised in the ways of Islam had already left Allah behind. She had come home carrying the name of Jesus in her heart, and with it, a storm that would soon destroy everything. When Layla returned to Riyadh in the summer of 2020, the city was exactly as she'd left it. Hot, strict, unchanging. Our home was untouched, her room preserved exactly as it had been. Her prayer rug was folded neatly on the shelf, her Quran resting on the nightstand. But Layla had changed. She moved through our house like someone visiting a place she once knew but no longer belonged to. She was calm, quiet, strangely peaceful. She still wore her black abaya, as expected, but something in how she carried herself was different. Her eyes seemed softer, her smile more genuine. One morning while doing laundry, I found a thin silver chain caught in the folds of her scarf. Attached to it was a small cross. My hands trembled as I held it. I tucked it back quickly, saying nothing. I told myself it meant nothing, just a symbol, maybe a gift from a friend. But deep inside, I knew it was more. It was a warning of what was coming. As weeks passed, I noticed other changes. She no longer joined us for every prayer time. When the call to prayer echoed through our neighborhood from the nearby mosque, she would often stay in her room. I would ask if she'd prayed, and she would say yes softly, but she never looked me in the eye. One Friday, we attended Jumu'ah prayer at our local mosque. The imam gave a sermon about the dangers of Western influence, warning parents to protect their children from foreign corruption. After the prayer, Layla quietly asked him how we could be certain the Quran hadn't been altered over time. His face froze. The question was inappropriate, almost blasphemous. He rebuked her gently but firmly, telling her that doubt was the path to destruction, that she should never question what was perfect. I apologized for her immediately, pulling her away, whispering urgently that she must never speak like that again. But she just looked at me calmly and said she was only asking what her heart needed to know. I tried to convince myself it was reverse culture shock, that many students returned from the West confused and unsettled. I thought perhaps she just needed time to readjust to our way of life. One evening, I asked her gently if she still believed in the Quran. She smiled, took my hand, and said she believed in truth. Her answer was not what I wanted to hear. It was vague, unsettling, dangerous. I didn't tell Abdullah. I didn't speak to anyone else. I convinced myself that silence would keep the peace, that maybe she would come back to us, that this strange phase would pass. But deep down, I knew I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't control. Then came the night that shattered my silence. We were sitting together on our balcony, watching the sky change colors as the sun set behind Riyadh's buildings. She turned to me, her eyes full of something I couldn't name, and told me she believed in Jesus now. She said he had found her in New York. For a moment, the world stopped. My breath caught. I wanted to pretend I hadn't heard her, but her words echoed too loudly. I asked her what she meant, trying to stay calm. She repeated it clearly. She believed in Jesus, not just as a prophet, but as Lord. I stared at her in disbelief. My daughter, born into a respected Muslim family, had just confessed to leaving Islam. I felt the ground beneath me crack open. I was terrified, not only for her soul, but for our safety. Apostasy in our country was no small matter. It could mean death. Yet still, I didn't report her. I couldn't. She was my daughter. I loved her more than I feared the consequences. After that night, Layla became more open. She spoke with conviction even when we disagreed. One afternoon, I overheard her speaking to our neighbor's daughter, a bright, curious girl. They sat in our garden sipping tea, and I could hear Layla gently talking about peace, forgiveness, and love. She never mentioned Jesus directly, but I knew what she was doing. I confronted her later, whispering harshly that someone might hear. She looked at me without fear and said people needed to listen, that there were others with the same questions she'd once had. I felt torn between pride and panic. She was brave, too brave. I warned her that people had died for less, that even whispering doubt could bring disaster. But she smiled that unwavering smile and told me she wasn't afraid because she knew who held her. The pressure in our house was growing. Abdullah remained unaware for a while, but he'd begun noticing her long hours in her room, her refusal to attend certain gatherings, her unwillingness to recite Quran with him. One day, he said to me that something was different in her eyes, not rebellion exactly, but something deeper. He told me to keep an eye on her. I nodded silently, fear twisting in my stomach. I knew the storm was coming, and I knew that once it arrived, no prayer, no status, no reputation could protect her or me. It happened on a Thursday afternoon in September 2020. Layla was in her room, and our housemaid Noura was folding laundry just outside her door. I was in the kitchen when Noura came rushing in, her face pale and trembling. She whispered that she'd heard Layla praying, but not in Arabic. She said Layla had sung the name of Jesus. My heart dropped. My hands froze over the tray I was preparing. Before I could stop her, Noura had already gone to Sheikh Abdullah. Within minutes, he stormed into Layla's room. I followed close behind, begging him with my eyes to stay calm. But it was too late. Layla stood with her Bible open on her bed, her lips still moving in quiet prayer. Abdullah snatched the book, threw it across the room, and shouted at her. He demanded to know if she was rejecting Islam, if she was spitting on Allah in his own house. Layla didn't respond. She only looked at him, steady, unafraid. That silence enraged him even more. He struck the wall with his fist, then turned back to her, his voice shaking with fury. He told her she'd brought shame on his name, on our family, on everything we stood for. I stepped between them, trying to calm him, but he pushed me aside. That night he made 2 phone calls, one to his brother in the ministry, one to the local imam. The imam arrived early the next morning with his bag of oils and verses. He told us Layla must have been influenced by evil spirits while abroad. He performed ruqya in her room, reciting loudly from the Quran, placing his hand over her head while she sat completely still. Layla didn't resist, but neither did she pretend. When he finished, she said gently that he couldn't drive out what wasn't there. The imam stared at her, stunned, then turned to Abdullah and told him she was beyond his help. He said this wasn't confusion. She had left Islam. Abdullah didn't sleep that night. He paced the halls like a caged animal, muttering verses under his breath. On the second day, he called for me and declared we would go to Medina. He said Layla would renounce her beliefs before the congregation at the Prophet's mosque. She would stand before the Ummah and declare belief in Allah and His Prophet, or she would be nothing to us. I wept. I begged him not to make her do it. I told him forcing her would only bring more shame, but his mind was made up. We left for Medina the next morning. Layla sat in silence during the entire drive. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She just stared out the window with that same peaceful expression. When we arrived at the mosque, Abdullah spoke privately to the imam, arranging for Layla to speak publicly. But when the moment came and all eyes turned to her, Layla simply said she believed in Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Gasps filled the mosque. Someone shouted for God's forgiveness. Abdullah's face turned white with rage. He grabbed her arm and dragged her out of the mosque. I followed them back to the car, begging him to stop, but he wouldn't speak. He wouldn't even look at me. That night, back in Riyadh, he locked Layla in the basement of our home. It was a cold, windowless room we used for storage. He took her phone, her books, even her pillows. He told her she would stay there until she came back to Islam. I pleaded with him. I reminded him she was his only daughter, that she'd always been good and loyal. But to him, she had become an enemy of Allah. He said she'd brought death to our door, that this was an honor crime, that he was cleaning the shame. I couldn't believe those words were coming from his mouth. He wasn't the man I'd married anymore. He had become someone willing to destroy his own child to defend his reputation. Days turned into weeks. Layla stayed locked in that basement with only bread and water. At first she sang softly to herself, then she prayed aloud in English. I would sit near the door listening, tears streaming down my face. One night I crept down when Abdullah was asleep and passed her a blanket and a few pages from her Bible I'd managed to hide. She kissed my hands and told me not to worry, that he could hurt her body but not her soul. Every time I saw her, she looked thinner, weaker. But her spirit remained unbroken. Her eyes still held that light. Abdullah, meanwhile, became consumed with rage. He told his brothers and friends that Layla had fallen under Western brainwashing, that she was ungrateful and needed correction. He even consulted with a cleric from Mecca about sending her to a private rehabilitation center for apostates. I feared he was planning something worse. I wanted to save her, but I didn't know how. Every move I made was watched. The maid had become distant, no longer helping with small mercies. Friends stopped visiting. Rumors were spreading. Late at night, I would kneel in my room and whisper words I'd never said before. I would whisper Jesus' name, asking if he was real, begging him to protect my daughter. I didn't understand what I was doing or who I was praying to. But I was desperate. The man I'd once respected now terrified me. Our home had become a prison, and my daughter was its captive. But Layla never broke. Every time I looked into her eyes, I saw something burning brighter than fear. And that frightened me more than anything, because I knew Abdullah could see it too. It was a Thursday night just after midnight when it happened. I had just finished praying, though by then I wasn't sure who I was praying to anymore. I sat in the living room in darkness, and that's when I heard the first scream. It came from the basement. It was Layla's voice, sharp, high, full of agony. I jumped up and ran to the stairwell, but the door was locked. Abdullah had the key with him. I pounded on the door with my fists, shouting her name, shouting for him to stop. The walls were thick, but I could hear it clearly. the sound of skin being struck, something boiling, the hiss of hot oil hitting flesh, and her choking sobs. My knees gave out. I collapsed on the floor, helpless, listening to my child's cries of pain. Minutes passed that felt like hours. Then came silence, a heavy, suffocating silence that told me something had ended. The next morning I woke up on the floor. My head ached. My hands were bruised from pounding the door. I rushed to the basement as soon as Abdullah left for prayer. I unlocked it with the spare key I'd hidden months ago. The smell hit me first. Burnt oil, blood, and something else I still can't describe. Layla lay on the cold concrete floor. Her body curled in on itself. Her skin was blistered and raw. Her lips were slightly parted. Her eyes were closed. I called her name again and again, but she didn't move. I touched her face, cold, still. She was gone. My daughter, my Layla, had died alone in pain on the hard floor of our own home. My screams filled the house, but no one came. The maid stood at the top of the stairs, shaking. She'd seen Abdullah carry a pot of oil down the night before. She'd heard what I heard, but she'd said nothing. An hour later, the police came. I hadn't called them. Nura had, using her hidden phone to dial emergency services in secret. When the officers arrived, Abdullah was calm. He told them Layla had been mentally unstable for months. He said she'd refused to eat, had harmed herself, and died from a breakdown. He even produced medical reports, fabricated ones from a private clinic. The officers looked at the body, took a few notes, then left. No autopsy, no photos, no investigation. The case was closed in less than an hour. Death by mental health crisis, they wrote. No charges, no arrest. The story was buried before the body. I wanted to scream, to fight, to expose the truth. But I had no one. No lawyer would touch a case involving a senior minister. Layla's name disappeared from every record as if she'd never existed. Her burial was rushed. There was no call to prayer over her grave. No friends, no neighbors, no farewell. Just a quiet plot on the edge of the cemetery. I watched them lower her body into the ground, wrapped in plain white cloth, her face already gone from the world. Abdullah didn't shed a single tear. He stood stiff, muttering Quranic verses, and left before the soil was packed. I stayed long after everyone else had gone. I knelt beside her grave and wept until my voice broke. I whispered apologies, begged her to forgive me, told her I'd tried, but in the end I had failed. I failed as a mother, and I couldn't undo any of it. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in my room with the lights off, staring at the ceiling, my chest heavy with grief. And then something happened. The air in the room shifted just slightly at first, like someone entering quietly. I sat up, heart pounding. The room filled with a soft glow. I turned toward the door, and there she was, Layla. Not as she had died, but whole. Her skin unscarred, her eyes bright, her hair loose over her shoulders. She stood in white, glowing softly. Her face was peaceful, not angry. She looked at me and smiled. She told me she forgave him, that she'd seen Jesus, that he'd welcomed her. I burst into tears. I wanted to reach out to hold her, but my hands wouldn't move. She wasn't here to stay. She was here to give me peace. And then, just as quietly, she was gone. After that vision, everything changed for me. I couldn't pray to Allah anymore. The Quran felt hollow. But Layla, she had found peace. She had seen something real on the other side. I remembered her words. Jesus found me, Mama. I held onto that sentence like a lifeline. It was the only truth that made sense. I found her journal weeks later, hidden beneath her mattress. In it, she'd written about her dreams, her prayers, her hope that I would find Jesus too. One page read, "Mama is closer to the light than she knows." I just want her to see. That night, I knelt beside my bed and spoke to Jesus for the first time. I didn't know how to pray. I just asked him to show himself to me like he'd shown himself to Layla, and he did. I felt his presence fill the room, warm, gentle, overwhelming. I heard his voice whisper that I wasn't forsaken, that he saw me, that he loved me. Tears streamed down my face. I had spent my life trying to be perfect in religion, but in that moment, I was simply known and still loved. I knew I couldn't stay in Riyadh. Within weeks, I contacted a Christian aid organization online. They helped me apply for asylum. I told Abdullah I was visiting family in Lebanon, and he barely looked up when I left. I flew to Cyprus with nothing but a small suitcase, Layla's Bible, and her journal. When I arrived, I was met by Christians who welcomed me, protected me, and gave me a new home. A month later, I was baptized in the Mediterranean Sea. I took a new name, Grace, because I should be dead, but I'm alive. Because I should be bitter, but I'm at peace. News of my departure reached Riyadh. Abdullah remarried quickly and declared I was dead to him. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had lost everything. But I'd gained Jesus, and that was worth it all. If you're reading this and you're searching, know this: Jesus is real. He loved my daughter enough to receive her when she died. He loves you enough to reveal himself to you too. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to say yes. Let's pray together. Lord Jesus, I know I'm a sinner. I believe you died for me and rose again. I accept your sacrifice. Come into my heart. Transform me. Fill me with your Spirit. I surrender my life to you. Amen. If you prayed that, welcome to the family. Find a church. Read the Bible. Tell someone about your decision. And please, pray for the persecuted church. Pray for women like Layla who die for their faith. Pray for mothers like me who lose everything but gain Christ. He is worth it. Every tear, every loss, every sacrifice, because the grave is empty, and so is mine.